Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to the Beyond IT podcast. This is the very first episode where I actually have a guest to talk all about his journey in IT. I'm very excited to announce that this very first real episode, obviously, I had the introductory episode prior to this. It's going to be somebody that I know personally, that I've known for the past couple of years, and truly, he has been a great inspiration to myself and many others. I've had the privilege again of knowing him for several years already, and have had a small part in his journey towards where he is going. And that person that I'm talking about is none other than Michael Hilton. If you don't know who Michael Hilton is, well, I wouldn't blame you, but you probably have somewhat been living under a rock, because this kid, I shouldn't even call him kid, young adult, has been making a lot of headway and a lot of noise in the network engineering community. And I'm really excited to have him on. He's currently 17 years old, got his CCNA at 14, CCNP at 15 years old. You've probably seen a couple of other interviews with him on other YouTube channels, and I'm really happy to have him on today. He is also a native of South Texas, which is where I'm from, 3.5 hours south of San Antonio in the heart of the Rio Grande Valley. So it's really nice having such an awesome person here on this first podcast. So let me bring you on. Michael, welcome to the Beyond IT podcast. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me on. I am very honored to be on your first podcast episode.
That's awesome. I'm probably more ecstatic that you are here, and I'm just ecstatic in the fact that you are such an inspiration to so many people out there in the IT industry, and at such a young age, it's just extremely impressive what you're doing. And for me, the pride that is Michael Hilton is the fact that he lives like here, 10 miles away from me in the heart of the Rio Grande Valley. And I just think that's awesome. So thank you. I could think of no better person to share the first interview with than you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, awesome. So I just wanted to start off the podcast for anybody who doesn't know who you are. Who is Michael Hilton, and can you tell us kind of like a summary of your journey?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, my name is Michael Hilton, 17 years old, and right now I'm on my way to study up and hopefully soon enough pass the CCIE Enterprise Infrastructure exam. I've been studying Cisco and the whole networking field in general for, I don't know, give or take 3 years now. And I actually started off pretty young with technology in general. I started off around with networking around 13 years old, but with technology, wow. I started off when I was 3 years old, when I broke my mom's laptop, or I should say took it apart. Didn't know how to put it back together, but started off with that. Later worked on other things, and a huge thanks to my parents and my family for kind of helping me grow with technology, because my dad and others in my family have helped me since the beginning with providing me resources to not only learn stuff but also increase my love for technology. So
yeah, let me kind of like stop you there really quick, because I also got a very early start to technology as well. I had an uncle of mine that kind of, I guess, took me under his wing when I was really young. He had an IT business here locally, and so I started working on computers, 2-3 years old, working on computers, right? Quote unquotes for those of you on the podcast. But how is it that you were, I guess, at least at my age, I'm 29 next week, there wasn't a whole lot of technology around at the time, right? So to have a computer wasn't common. Curious to know, like, did you have somebody in your life that was into technology as well that got you into this, or how did that work out?
Yeah. So, for example, my dad, for a large part of his life, was working in technology, and as well as his brothers, my uncles, too. They have, been working in IT for a while,
Mhm.
and really because of my dad, because of the stuff he provided, uh, and just kind of following in his path, kind of got me going to learning IT and networking as a whole in general.
Okay, awesome. So you guys started with family as well.
Hmm.
That's awesome. All right. So you were thanking your parents sort of for all of the support that they've given you. Um, let's talk about, I guess, sort of your, I guess, growing up. How was it? Living as Michael Hilton, and what are some of the things that you enjoyed doing, like growing up, and what is it that you think ultimately compelled you to look into networking?
So when I was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years old, uh, I was more into studying medicine than anything else originally, or actually just learning it in general as a whole. So I just loved learning. And initially, I wanted to, I don't know, be an electrician. Then I kind of discovered, fossils and stuff. So I wanted to study paleontology. Then, for a large part, before I decided I wanted to do technology, I wanted to be a cardiologist. So I never would
Okay.
have imagined, in the beginning, that I would, follow down this path. But it
Mhm.
just so happens that, I just, it was always there in the background, but I never really paid attention to it until, um, really until I was like after 9, 10 years old.
Really? So you say in the background. Um, what do you mean by that? I guess I know one time you kind of recalled the fact that your father had like an old CCNA book in his bookshelf or something like that.
Hmm. So actually, before that, it was just one of those things with technology where my dad actually gave me an old computer or found someone that had one, and I took it apart, and he knew all the parts, and I just discovered that. And it's funny that you bring that up because recalling and going through my bookshelf and some of the stuff my dad had, I actually had a Cisco book that I was kind of skimming through back in fourth and fifth grade just to, I don't know, just to read something.
Uh huh.
But it wasn't until probably a year or so ago that I was going through and I saw it, and it was, dated from the year 2000. So I kind of was studying the stuff, but I didn't remember anything, nor did I ever expect to be in the position I'd be in today.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you read the book, did you understand any of it? Just wondering.
I don't believe so. I mean, I could have, but I was just reading and reading. I didn't, at the time, know how I learned much, just because the
Mhm.
only places I did learn a lot of information was in school, so I didn't have a method of learning. So it was just kind of reading for a pastime. But since it was
Mhm.
uh, so technical, I didn't really grasp most of the content, and therefore I forgot everything until I discovered Cisco uh, more further down the line.
Yeah, because a lot of the times you almost have to have like a base level networking knowledge in order to pick up a CCNA book and understand it, right? Because there's sort of I guess a certain amount of topics that they kind of figure, okay, you know what a computer is, how it works, how IP addresses work, or what an IP address is, that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know this particular book, but yeah, I can imagine. I remember when I was a kid, I also tried reading like a programming book, and it completely went over my head, and I never picked up a programming book until college again, and I was never much of a programmer, and I'm still not. I still kind of gravitate towards infrastructure myself. So so I'm trying to remember where we were at here, but you were talking about like you were like 9 years old. You picked up this book, and you were still trying to. I was asking you about you growing up and sort of what made you go down the IT road.
Yeah. So let me see. Around the time frame, I believe a little after. Yeah. So my dad was into this thing also called amateur radio, so ham radio,
Yeah, ham radio.
and he wanted me to pass the technician exam. So just in case any of you out there are also ham radio operators, my call sign is N5ZZB. But he wanted me to pass it, and he told me that, it just kind of also went over my head. He told me, if you pass it, the whole world of technology is going to open up to you. And I took it and passed it the first time barely. I believe the passing score is like a 75% or something, and I just barely got it with like a few points. I can't remember much, but I just felt so accomplished, kind of learning and passing that, learning some stuff about electronics and radios in general.
So that was really your first IT certification, if you really think about it, right?
Yeah, you can classify it as such. It's more of, I guess, of a license.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it was my first credential.
Yeah, exactly. Your first credential. Awesome. And so then, so what made you go into looking at routing and switching specifically?
So I actually started off when I got more into technology with Linux. My dad also gave me an Ubuntu netbook, and got more into that. And then I kind of just was learning more about IT in general down the line. And so what really took, I guess, a turning point that actually jumped me into getting into routing and switching and Cisco in general was that the local area here where we're at, they had a CompTIA boot camp, which was sponsored by the Texas Workforce Commission. And I applied, and this was around when I was 12, 13 years old, about around that time frame. And, they told me I was too young. So I went to my dad, told him that I received an email. He told me, well, why don't you go look up, Microsoft or Cisco certifications? And that's what I did within the next few minutes, and landed on the first the CCAR page, Cisco Certified Architect, and then actually
Straight to the top. Straight to the top.
to the top. And then went all the way to the bottom where I saw CCENT, and where he was working at the time, he actually had a coworker named Josh Murphy. Shout out to him.
Yes.
He also helped me very much go down the path, and also helped me study with CCNA. But yeah, that's kind of the way I discovered, networking and routing and switching as a whole in general, was because I got, told I was too young for the program. What's funny though is I actually was able to join the program about a year and a half later. So,
Wow. So what was because it was the Texas Workforce Commission, there was a restriction on the age limit or something, because it had to go towards people that could get a job. Was that the reason why?
yeah, so it was a general guideline. It wasn't really anything set in stone, but it was just, you're kind of taking a risk on, 12, 13-year-old, because you don't know how much they know on technology, and you're going to give them all these books, all these training materials. And, what happens if they, decide to give up or something? That spot could have been taken by someone that actually needed the resources. But further down the line, they actually had, a few openings, and they actually asked if I wanted to join in, and went through and got my CompTIA ITF, the IT Fundamentals A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus.
Awesome. Yeah, I actually, I'm wondering if this is the same situation where I was a presenter for the beginning of the CCNA bootcamp. Is this the same event that we're talking about, or is it a different event?
For the this was a bit after, so actually I skipped some time.
Okay.
In the story. So going back to where I was a bit before, I discovered the CCENT and spent around 9 months studying for it, because mainly it was just figuring out what resources I wanted to use, what study method I should use. I figured out that I was more of a visual learner than anything else. Did that, and along the same path, picked up another mentor by the name of Mr. Del McKay from VMware, and he as well helped me when I got my CCNA. So even the second part, so now I know there's only one CCNA, there's no CCENT and CCNA anymore.
Right.
In that part, you could say that the CCNA had a lot more material than the CCENT. It was a lot more in depth. But I actually, because I figured out how I studied, I actually passed it in 3 months. So the ICND2.
Yeah, that's a good time frame for that. Yeah. So what I was trying to recall was the prior event that there was. I know we have a local organization here called Code RGV that's run by a gentleman named Drew Letts, and so I know there was also a hurdle in terms of trying to get you in because you were under the age of 16 or 18, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this group was sort of created to foster sort of a CCNA study group. And so Drew asked me, he called me to see if I can go and present to this group, just to kind of give him an idea of my story, right? He found me, well, him and I have actually talked before, because we both sell and talk about engineering here in the area. And he asked me to go by and talk to you guys. And that's where you and I met for the first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of went up there and talked to you guys about sort of my journey in like 30 minutes to an hour and got to answer some questions. And, to this day, I think that's one of the best things that I ever did was walk in that room and do that presentation, because it allowed me to be able to kind of show other people that there is hope and there is a way to get from where you are to where you want to be. In my case, that, and for you probably as well, is that road somewhere along the way. It means looking at and passing, putting together a strategy for passing your CCNA, your CCNP, and then ultimately getting a role in the network engineering industry, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and as a result, I got to meet you, and I got to meet a lot of other folks that were there. And I know you in particular have taken the opportunity that was not given to you, because you obviously there were hurdles for you, right, for your age, but you were still able to kind of talk to people and network and convince people like, hey, I can be here as well, and I can hang with the big boys and get my certifications if I want. And that's what you did. And here you are, um, it, so you got your CCNA at 14. I mentioned earlier that you got your CCNP at 15. And one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, and maybe I should have, is it safe to say that you are the youngest CCIE candidate that's ever, uh, I guess, tried to study or is about to take the exam? Is that something that's safe to say?
Um, I'm not exactly sure, because I know there was one candidate a while back. I believe his name was Jorge Ospina,
Mm-hmm.
and he actually got he actually beat me 1 year to all of my certification goals. So I think he got his CCNA at 13, CCNP at 14, and from then on he went and got his CCIE, but he didn't finish getting it until I believe he was about 19 years old.
Got it.
So it's kind of in between. I'm not exactly sure, but I guess it's somewhere in between there.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, getting your CCNP at 15 is a huge accomplishment. And I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to put a pin in the CCIE piece and save that for later. But wanted to go back and sort of talk about, you were able to do the NA and the NP in what I believe is to be a very reasonable time frame. I think you said about 3 months or so for the NA, or with the CCENT, then the CCNA, and then about a year or so, right, for your NP.
Mm-hmm.
And to me,
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, so the CCENT was 9 months, CCNA was about 3 months, 12 months, so that's about a year. And then I spent about another year working on the CCNP. So CCNP was Again, since they restructured the whole certification, it was for routing and switching. It was comprised of 3 exams: the switch, route, and troubleshoot.
Mhm.
The switch I did about 3 or 4 months. The route I did in about 6 months, and the troubleshoot about 2-3 months.
Yeah, and to me that's very reasonable timing, especially considering the fact that you're still in high school, right?
Yep.
Barely out of middle school in my book. Um, Personally, for me, I didn't even really know what certifications were until my, I guess, my senior year of college. I was gonna graduate like within the year, and I had a coworker of mine say, "Hey, I hear that doing Cisco certifications is super hard." And I was like, Cisco certifications. I had been working a little bit with Cisco switching and wireless and firewalls at the time, and I had never heard that they had certifications. So just the fact that you were able to know the fact that there were certifications out there is, I guess, is a big advantage, and it's sort of the great thing about social media, if leveraged property and the internet, is that you can find all this information that you need, and it's at your disposal, right? When before it was, I think, a little bit more. There wasn't a whole lot of people talking about this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think at the time there was a guy named Kyle Martin. Shout out in case you hear this, Kyle. That was doing videos about Cisco, and there was pretty much nobody else. And now you see it, much more prevalent. Uh, Wanted to talk a little bit about. You mentioned that you had developed sort of your study strategy, and for those listeners that are currently considering going after certification or currently doing a certification, how did you develop your study plan, and what are the things that made you realize this is how I like to learn and this is the process that I like to use? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. So going once again back again to the CCENT days, uh, the only way of learning I was taught at the time was, what you learn in school. And everything, is broken up into small chunks. So taking this and, studying on my own was something else that, I hadn't conquered before.
Mm-hmm.
And what really hit me was, initially memorizing, port numbers, layers of the OSI model, and understanding what each layer uh, was supposed to be comprised of. Same thing with TCP IP models. So in the beginning, there was a lot of memorization to be done. And, I just had trouble sticking that information in my head. So what I ended up, figuring out as a study strategy was making flashcards, for example, with the different
Mm-hmm.
layers of the OSI model, port numbers, and their features, and as well as, figuring out and sticking to, uh, a single resource sometimes for certain topics, which I'll get to, and a schedule. So for the, sticking to certain resources for topics, because of the way I was still figuring out how to learn, it took me about a month to learn subnetting, which,
Mm-hmm.
it was a significant chunk just because I kept jumping from method to method to method
Mm-hmm.
because one method didn't really stick. So I just kept like hopping around. And it wasn't towards when I discovered the method by Todd Lamley in the CCNA book that I really understood subnetting. So that's why it took me, a month to comprehend and understand Class A, B, and C subnetting. Uh, and it probably would have taken, a week or less if I would have just stick to one resource. So
Do you
that's
think it would have benefited you had you stuck to just one resource, or do you see a value in understanding the perspectives of multiple resources and finding what works best for you? What do you
I
think?
I think this might contradict what I was just saying, but I think getting multiple resources is very important. Uh, but when you do it, make sure that you do it where you're not spending an excessive, amount of time trying to learn something. learning does take time for some people. But for me, in my example, having multiple resources eventually caused me, actually led up to learning subnetting, but it also was extremely time consuming, and I kept jumping around. So what I think what is best is you can have multiple, but just make sure that you stick to going through. Okay, from this source, I'm going to go through these topics, and the same with other sources. Because if not, you're gonna, for subnetting now for me is a simple topic, and maybe for some people listening it's very difficult, but for me the simple topic took me a month to learn, instead of probably a few days or a few weeks. So it just depends, but make sure make sure you're focused enough that you can understand from multiple sources but not waste time.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good kind of balance that you have to strike. So you focus on a certain topic at a time, and so what do you typically do? Do you typically read something first, watch a video, lab? What's the order that you do that? I'll share mine after.
Sure. So just before I bring that in, I forgot to mention another study tip is make a schedule. For example, every day when I got into finding out how I would study, I would study from 7 p.m. through 11 p.m. and every day. So it just prepares your mind. If you create a schedule and kind of per each week have a topic. So I don't know, this week, for example, if I were studying for a CCNA again, this week I'll be studying, I don't know, EIGRP, next week OSPF, and so on. So what I typically do is start off, as I mentioned before, finding out how you learn the best, is really important. So for me, I'm a visual learner. Some people might, start off differently. I know some people that start off with reading first, but for me, I start off with, watching a video, and then watching that video, hopefully it has, some configuration examples. So I watch the video and then follow along with the configuration examples of the author, and also read a book and follow along with them. And of course, find a separate lab where, I'm not being guided. So it's just like complete this task, or, make this work. So you're not having to, rely on other source except maybe, context sensitive help on the command line or something.
Yeah, yeah, and I really resonate with a lot of the things that you said, and I think maybe some of it came from advice from me, advice from others along the way, because I really resonate with the subnetting piece. I think that is a big hurdle for a lot of people that want to get into networking. I know this coworker of mine that told me about that Cisco certifications are really hard. He said subnetting is the hardest topic in the CCNA, and here you are mentioning it, right? That it took you about a month. I had a similar issue when I was reading through the book, and I could not. I just didn't understand the way that they were doing it in the book. I don't remember who the author was or what. This is a point where I realized where not only did I have to worry, or not worry about, but not only did I have to focus on just one author or one way of looking at things, but maybe I had to explore the way other instructors showed you how to do the same thing, right? So this is where I started exploring, with CBT nuggets, with INE, with other Chris Bryant I think is still doing some training now, and ultimately, on Udemy. And honestly, the way that Jeremy Char explained it, at least back when I was doing the training, is a way that I really understood how to get it done.
Yeah, I agree. And definitely on the CCNA, I had a bunch of resources that I went through. So one of them you mentioned was Chris Bryant. Went through CVT Nuggets, went through INE, went through, some stuff from David Bombal. So, Packet Tracer Labs, I went through the 101 Labs book for CCNA at the time. And of course, read Todd Lamney's book, which really helped me. Saw his video content, and also went through the official cert guides at the time, the what was it, 200-125 official cert guide library from Wendell Oldham.
Yep, I went through those as well, and yeah, to your point again, I personally think that anybody going after certification should do and buy pretty much as they can in terms of training, and because I don't think one size fits all, right? For any training, all the way up the ladder. Personally, from my CCNT all the way up to my IE, I use multiple trainers, and I think that's the best thing that I could have done to get as much of an advantage as possible. The other thing is, study hours. Really, really important that you bring that up, and having sort of a set timeline for yourself, because I think oftentimes, we each have, our own hurdles and our own lives that we need to get through. But if you don't have something on a schedule, sometimes things don't get done if they're not on the schedule, right? And for all of us, I mean, even you have a family, you have your own responsibilities. At your age, as a 17-year-old, you can imagine as an adult, it may seem impossible, but honestly, we all have the same amount of time in the day. It's just about cutting out that time, even if it's, 2 hours a day, 4 hours every other day. And that was something that I know really worked well for me. It was setting aside very, very specific hours every single day, or a couple of times a week to study. And it helped me set boundaries, with my wife now, my girlfriend at the time. I was going through my IE. It's like, look, I'm studying from 6 to 12, on these days. You have me these days and on, maybe some of the weekends. So just for a little while, and it worked out. It worked out really well for us. And I think it's really important in multiple ways.
Yeah, and I want to add to that, setting, especially not only the schedule part, but once you're ready for the exam, once you feel ready, once you've gone through all the objectives, I know some people often ask that, how do you know when you're ready? You just feel comfortable. So if someone provides you with a task, like from a lab book, or just going through the, objective list, and you feel pretty confident with something, that's when you pretty much know you're ready. And what puts pressure, actually a lot of positive pressure, for you to, wrap up and actually go in for the exam, is to schedule it. Maybe for you, it might be a week ahead. Maybe you want to schedule it next week, or maybe you're just starting off from the very beginning and want to allocate, 3 months, 6 months for the CCNA, and actually going for and paying for the exam puts a lot of pressure on you to actually make sure you understand everything and make sure you'll do well on the exam. So
Yeah.
and scheduling it, the exam really puts a lot of pressure in a good way for you to, accomplish the goal, instead of, dragging it out or changing deadlines.
Yeah, I completely agree. For anybody who's on that fence where they've gone through the content, or you're really close to finishing the content, I would say just schedule it, 2 or 3 weeks out, or depends on the exam, right? But that definitely puts a lot of quote unquote pressure on. Another thing that I again, is something that just kind of comes through my mind, and I want to share it, and hopefully this resonates to some people out there, is, it's also important that you got your mindset right, around certifications and studying, right? Because it's not about just getting the certification. The mindset should really be around, you are getting the certification as a result of you studying and understanding and learning the material. So the end goal shouldn't be to get a piece of paper. The end goal should be to gain the knowledge. And I think when you have that mindset, it puts you in a position where you don't have anything to lose, because it's not about passing the test. It's you have less pressure, because you don't walk in there saying, I need to pass this test. I need to pass this test. It's not about that. It's about the knowledge that you gain from the journey, right?
Yeah, I believe that's true. And That's why learning some of these topics in the beginning took me so long, just because I enjoyed learning those topics, and I wanted to learn them, to a very well depth, so to say.
Hmm.
So not only I did gain the knowledge, but if I did well on the exam, also attain the credential as well.
Yeah, yeah, completely agree with that as well. You talked a little bit about labbing. I'm sure our listeners are wondering, with the way that things have changed, there's a lot of alternatives to having a physical lab. You can now throw things in the cloud on a virtual server, just do it, maybe packet tracer. What are your thoughts? Is a physical lab still necessary, and where might it be necessary? Where is it maybe not as necessary, in your opinion?
So in my opinion, for routing and switching, I think having a lab is necessary from the very beginning. Uh, like in your CCNA days. Now, anything above that, gets very expensive to have a physical lab, which I'll most likely get later into in the conversation. But I believe having a physical lab not only gives you an appreciation for, how everything works. You can see when you plug in a cable, you can see the LEDs, or, uh, setting up a topology where it's physically looped, where you could see spanning tree. And, on top of that, most likely if you have, I don't know, decent size topology or something, you get to the point where uh, you know it's much more cheaper to buy your supplies and make Ethernet cables, which is something, a skill I learned through working with my physical lab, was not only seeing everything work together physically and
Hmm.
logically, but also I learned how to make my own cables instead of just following along with the book and memorizing the T568B standard. You actually go ahead and buy the cable, go through the pain of putting the jack in and crimping everything, lining up all the
Hmm.
individual copper wires. So
Yep.
I believe in the beginning it's extremely useful because you learn these things that you wouldn't otherwise from just dragging and dropping a link like in GNS3 or even G. But with that being said, uh, once you get to your CCNP and of course CCIE level of topics, the labs start getting bigger and bigger. So used Cisco equipment has gotten a lot cheaper. I know from when I started, just a bit cheaper, maybe 20-30% cheaper, uh, which actually is actually a decent bit. But even probably when you started, it's a huge difference for what you can get, but it's still more expensive to buy maybe for routers and for switches than it is to buy a copy of Cisco modeling labs,
Hmm.
either using that platform or throwing it in with EvenG. uh, so I believe it's a lot once you got your understanding of how everything works physically, and you're on the CCNP and CCIA level. I believe at that point it's much more worth it to invest in something virtual. And with that, either if your local laptop or desktop is able to handle the lab size, either do that or get some rack rentals. Or what I've been doing, for example, in my SD-WAN studies, is leveraging Google Cloud to host my EvenG topology that has the SD-WAN images. So that's because of my limited local resources, I'm learning new skills such as with Google Cloud to bring up a topology virtually hosted in one of Google's data centers, but using those skills to tie everything together and get my laptop to so and so run a virtual lab.
Hmm. Yeah, so you start kind of doing cross architecture, right? Because now you have to understand, VMware. You may have to understand Azure or GCP or whatever you're using, right? Not only just the networking piece. I couldn't agree with you more. I think when you start off as a newbie, right? You've never even seen a switch or understand how some of the components work or what it looks like. It's really important to understand that because it makes it real, right? it's one thing when you see it in packet tracer, you see the little things moving, the little cables. It's a whole nother thing when you see it in action and you can visualize, okay, this is where the switch is, and there's going to be like a patch panel, and that's going to run through the ceiling, and that's going to go here to the AP, and it really makes it much more real, and it's like I remember I'm not a voice guy. I've never really been into voice technology and that kind of stuff, right? It just wasn't my thing. I prefer routing, switching, wireless, data center security, but voice is a whole nother monster for me. But originally in my career, I had to learn a little bit about it. So I went to Jeremy Chara on CBT Nuggets. It's not a not a plug for them, but I remember he had his lab, and it was a physical lab because you had to obviously have a phone. And he was like, yeah, there's nothing better than actually making a phone ring. And so I was like, you know what? He's probably right. Let me go buy a phone. And so I went and bought a phone, got the stuff working, and I understood. It's really cool when you can see the spanning tree loop happening. When you see BPDU guard in action or whatever. I have a very quick story. Maybe it's a little bit embarrassing, but I remember in one of my previous jobs, it was like one of the first days on the job, and they asked me, go ahead and go run this fiber cable from this switch to the other switch. And I was like, okay. And I had never run a fiber cable in my entire life. Like I didn't understand the concept that there were multiple types of optics. So there's like SR optics, LR4 optics, there's GBIC, different form factors, and HWIC optics, or not HWIC optics, but the SFP, QSFP. And I was completely new to that because I had never had a switch that had a fiber optic option on it, or if it did, I had never used it. So, but again, this was a while back. Okay, so I had only run into copper trunks and copper layer 3 uplinks and stuff at the time. So it really helps to have sort of a physical lab when you start off. And yeah, to your point, once you start getting into the higher level routing and switching technologies, nowadays, you have so many options. Before it was like GNS3 and that thing was like super buggy at the time. Now you got, CML, formerly, what was it, CML, viral.
Mm-hmm.
You have the option to do it on, ESXi with the CSR 1000Vs. You can get really creative, even throw that in the cloud. So I completely agree with your concept. And I still think having a physical lab is great for studying things outside of just routing and switching. So like voice, you obviously going to need a phone, wireless AP.
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, you can't really virtualize that kind of stuff. So you still got to have sort of a physical lab to run it. And it's fun.
Yeah, I believe a lot with, with wireless too. I mean, just, troubleshooting actual, physical layer stuff you can't really do in an emulated environment. Maybe you could emulate the wireless LAN controller, but, to actually learn some wireless, you need actual physical APs.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. So awesome. We went through like the study tips, your lab gear, anything you want to share in terms of a study tip or something that you think might be useful, or you think we covered most of it?
I think I covered most of it, but just something that I kept bringing, or that we kept bringing up, but I never really emphasized, was to network in person. I keep forgetting to say this in all the interviews or any tips I've been asked, is to network in person. My dad actually, I know you mentioned Drew, my dad knew Drew, and actually in that way I got to know Drew, and then Drew reached out to you. We had this kind of study group, and then I met you, and then I met other people, And in fact, I met several CCIEs, in person. Uh, and I don't think I would have been in the same position I would be right now if, I would have not networked in person or networked on LinkedIn or Twitter or, various other media platforms. So that's something that maybe doesn't get emphasized as much as, I would like other people to mention it, but I
Mhm.
believe it's extremely important, networking, especially in person. Maybe not that much right now, but, a lot
Yeah.
virtually too.
Hey, there's still ways to be in person without being there.
Mm-hmm.
The world is getting much smaller now. As I mentioned before, you know, there weren't a lot of, IT YouTubers, even, 6, 7 years ago. And now you're seeing them all over the place. You see people on Twitch talking IT, and the world is just becoming a smaller place. Whereas in the past, you may not have heard of somebody from a small area like where we live, in
Mm-hmm.
the Rio Grande Valley here in Texas, and now you're able to expand your horizon and your network, which is incredibly important. I When I had like 300 subscribers on my YouTube channel, and I moved to Seattle, which I don't know if you can see all the Seattle stuff back here, the Seahawks. Um, I moved to Seattle for a while for a job, and there was a guy there who had run across my YouTube video, and he was a subscriber, and I just couldn't believe it. He's like, "Oh, I knew who you were," and it's like, "Well, before we hired you," and so it, and pretty much every job I've had since then, it's like they know who I am already, and I think it adds sort of um, a way to validate kind of who you are and what you're trying to bring to the table, right? Um, Especially when you do something for free, you do something in the public eye. I mean, it's nerve wracking to do something like that, but most of us here are doing it for the good of other people, right? For other people to succeed and learn from our experiences or the experiences of others, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So yeah, I completely agree. Nothing. It's not just networking from a Cisco iOS standpoint, but also networking IRL, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good call out for sure. Um, since we're on the topic of studying and certifications, can you kind of talk a little bit about, you're an MP now, but I kind of said, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have kind of like a teaser in the title. You're working currently on your CCIE. And so where are you on that? And what was your decision making process on why you decided to pursue that? And just give us an update on where you're at.
Sure. So again, we're jumping in different parts, but after I got my CCNP, I thought, well, the I guess natural step above that is, or steps are either to broaden out or specialize even more in a field. So I wanted to specialize more in routing and switching, now called infrastructure.
Mhm.
So initially, I started off, you know, once I got around the time I almost finished my CCNP, uh, actually, because of Drew, he knew one of the people at the time. I'm not sure if it's on the website anymore, but they had a policy Cisco where it said you had to be 18 or older to go and take any expert level exam, whether that be the written or the actual lab exam. But he
Mhm.
actually knew a person by the name of Mr. Samuel Clements, which is one of the CCIE board members. And he said, if you pass 2 out of the 3 exams and finish your CCNP, once you get there, I'll see what I can do if I can change the policy. So initially, it got shot down by one of the higher ups in the certification board. But what he decided to do, which I'm so thankful for, is in Cisco Live they have this thing called the NetVet reception, and
Okay.
it's this thing where I believe it's people that have been CCIEs for 5 or more years ago, and they address any concerns to the CEO of Cisco, Mr. Chuck Robbins, and he actually brought up the my whole story type thing, and that they said they would make a change, and that's what they actually ended up doing. So huge thanks to both Drew and Mr. Samuel Clements for doing that. And I was at the point where I got the green light, 'cause at that point, I still wanted to do the CCIE, but I wasn't sure, because if I got told no, then I was probably going to broaden out, maybe study VMware or some other topics and specialize in those. So I got the green light, and the next big thing was, well, how do, uh, especially in this area, it's kind of hard to come by, some IT jobs, how, or things like that. So how do I get, the funding for lab exam or study materials? Because as we know, those are extremely expensive. Just studying for the exam
Right.
is probably more expensive than, some people's lab attempts. So initially I set up a GoFundMe, and, huge thanks to those people that supported me. I believe I was around the $500 mark, where the CEO of INE actually saw my page and reached out to me, which I'm extremely grateful for, Mr. Richard McLean. And he said that, if he would like, INE could sponsor my journey, pay for, training and exam attempts, and, everything in between. And, I was so excited, because I never would have expected a, training company as big as them, and especially in the IE field, from several people I've talked to, recommending them. And I love their content too. So I got that and got started, and then took down my campaign, as I didn't need any more funding, since INE was gonna, help me with everything else. And this was around, it was around this time last year, give or take a few months. And now I'm just, from my current process right now, I'm just reviewing a lot of technologies. I'm getting more and more closer to where I feel I'm, getting closer to go in and take the exam. But right now I'm just focusing on a lot of reviewing, learning a lot more SD-WAN topics, to get more specific into those topics required for the exam. And same thing with Cisco SD Access or DNA Center.
Mm-hmm.
So right now that's what I'm doing, going through a lot of review and studying the software-defined topics, and as well as Python 2 and working with APIs. So I'm kind of going on the final steps of my preparation. So this has been about what, give or take, about a year of actual studying for the IE after, finishing up CCNA and CCNP.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I'm glad you decided to go that route, and I'm really happy that the powers that be at Cisco decided to make that change, and allow you to move forward with doing what you want to do. In my opinion, I don't think age should really have anything to do with it. Again, it's really more about the knowledge than the age, in my opinion. So, and again, this ties back very heavily to what you said earlier, right? It's also about human networking too, right? So, um, some people might say, well, it's about who you know. No, it's not really about who you know. It's about having the connection with that person, and kind of explaining and understanding, having them understand your story. And then that kind of stuff is what really drives change, in your personal life and in the world, right? And so that's awesome. I know you've been working with a couple of people, I'm sure, along the way during your CCIE journey. I know I've had like a very, very small part along the way, maybe once or twice a month, getting together with you, and kind of going over, where you're at, what the strategy is, how you're feeling. And because I can imagine, it's I remember going through the IE process, it wasn't just about the IE world. It was also about what's going on in my world in real life, and how do I balance all of this. And, obviously right now, in the world that we're in with COVID-19, I'm sure it has presented you with some unique challenges, maybe, right? But yeah, I mean, nothing but great things are happening here. And I want to make sure that I shout out to you. You also have a YouTube channel as well, right? You mentioned a video you posted up there.
Yes, so I actually have a 5-part video series, where I actually went through where I talked about earlier about setting my SD-WAN lab,
Mhm.
using EVNG in Google Cloud. Uh, the YouTube channel name is you can just search up Michael Hilton, but it's much easier if you just type in youtube.com/Michael Hilton put together, capital M and capital H,
Mhm.
and that leads you to the video series that I worked on. I'm, of course, planning to release more videos, uh, but yeah, thank you for the mention.
Yeah, I'll be sure to put in all your social media and stuff in the show notes and in the description for those of you watching on YouTube. Um, well, that's great, Michael. I think I guess people would be probably curious to know when do you think that you are going to go and take and sit down for your IE lab?
So what I'm thinking of is, just because of the whole situation it is right now, uh,
Hmm.
I'm really planning towards taking the exam mid-January to late January, so of this upcoming year of 2021, and experience the actual exam, the new exam, because it's not routing and switching anymore, it's enterprise. But I plan around taking it in January. That's when I feel I'll be able to put up a good fight with the exam.
That's right. That's right. Um, Also wondering kind of I don't know if COVID-19 has been your biggest hurdle or what has been your biggest hurdle throughout all of this? Is it, the SDA topics? What is it?
My biggest hurdle is, thankfully not anything COVID-19 related, uh, but it's been more of a mental thing. And I
Mhm.
know you've told me before, and several other people, is that that thing is also the mental thing is also not mentioned enough going through the CCIE journey, because anyone can learn the topics, but not everyone will go and study for the IE, and go in and hopefully pass it. And I believe it's just there's a whole lot of things that you have to master and go through, and that's just the biggest hurdle, making sure you have everything fresh in your mind, and making sure that you're also being able to review things and also focus on any new topics that are on the blueprint, or any new topics to you, and being able to still remember syntax, theory, and everything in between. So I think the biggest thing is that, and not getting too overwhelmed and burnt out, going through the whole process, because it's just a huge journey.
Yeah, because I mean, you got to understand, right now you were at the 1 year mark. For me, it was 18 months or so. And there's certain topics that you learned or you went over 12 months ago, right? And maybe 8 months ago. And so there, you have to have a method by which you go back to those topics every so often. I know I've talked to you about sort of the idea of having a lab generator tool where you can, randomize your labs. That way you can go back and cover those topics every now and then so that you remain fresh. What about, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, doing that, making flashcards, going through your notes every once in a while, and, mixing up labs is important, because if not, you're just going to forget stuff. So doing those things, and, especially the lab part, just, let's say this week you're going to focus on OSPF. Well, go through OSPF, but also mix in EIGRP, or better yet, redistribution, and BGP, and some other topics too. So you make sure that your core focus is still the topic you chose to study, but also
Mhm.
mix in the other things, so you don't completely abandon them and have to do the same process, but with those topics that you kind of abandoned.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point because you first learn about these topics like in an isolated fashion,
Hmm.
but in the CCIE lab, you got to bring all those technologies together, and they're running, you know, literally over top of each other, especially with overlays in the SD-WAN world and SDA world. How has your experience been with these new topics? And my understanding is, as of right now, there's not a whole lot of training material out there for these software-defined technologies. What has been your experience, and how have you been able to tackle that problem?
So with those technologies, Cisco Platinum Learning Library has some actual free courses on SDA and SD-WAN to kind of get you started and understanding the theory and some of the implementation of the topics. So initially when you sign up, they'll give you a free 3-day trial to their whole library. But then after that, they have some topics that they leave open, such as the SDA ones and the SD-WAN ones. So if you're starting off, those are some good places to start because they're free. There's the documentation. But one of the biggest challenges is just being able to get access to some of the labs. So for SD-WAN, luckily, at the time of this podcast, or well, not SD-WAN in general, you can virtualize, the vManage, vBond, vSmart, Edge devices, C-Edge, vEdge. All of those devices you can, set up virtually. All you have to do is just have the compute power. But with something like SDA, at the time of this podcast, is not available as a virtual machine yet. So that's
Right.
one of the biggest struggles right now is just getting access to them because Cisco has documentation. They have some videos. There are some vendors that have releasing more training for them little by little. But for SD-WAN, you can, and even SDA, you can go ahead and use Cisco DevNet because they let you use their labs for free. The SD-WAN is generally available at any time because it's virtualized, but their their SDA lab or DNA center is typically, before it was like 1 or 2 week wait. Now it's like 3 or 4 week wait, since they have to use the physical appliance for that lab. But on the bright side, it is free to use. All you need is, I believe, just a Cisco account that you can just set up, or you can use a Google account or anything else. But doing that is, will give you access to mess around with some of the technologies. So there is a way. It's not, as easy as, just buying CML or doing some
Right.
GNS3 with, what has traditionally been done. But, there is some hope that hopefully in the future they release a virtual machine or something like ACI simulator, but for software-defined access rather. So hopefully.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of surprised that they haven't done so already. Come on, Cisco. Even for somebody who works at Cisco, sometimes it's difficult getting, DNA center even on our end, right? We do have a couple of labs that run, and unfortunately, I cannot share that kind of stuff with you without you actually being on the Cisco network. If not, I would do that. But yeah, I mean, it's not impossible to get access to a DNA center on DevNet.
But it just takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it just takes some time to make the reservation, and you got to be extra intentional with your scheduling, right?
Because they only let you reserve the sandbox for max of 24 hours at a time. And sometimes when you do get sandbox, it like runs from strange hours for, typical people. So it might go from 3 a.m. to 3 a.m. the next day. So, you're obviously going to be sleeping most likely for a lot of people that have, typical working schedule, but, you might have to make some adjustments just because you'll lose out on time that you can get access just because, now it's like 3-4 week wait just to get access to DNA center.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So we've had conversations, in the weeks prior, kind of what it is that you're going to do next, I guess, after you become the youngest CCIE ever. Hopefully, let's knock on wood on that one. But what are your plans in terms of, certification, getting a degree, getting a job? Where do you think you want to be like in the next 5 years, and how do you want to get there?
So I'm actually going to, I'm still in high school right now. I'm going to graduate this upcoming May, so May 2021. And what I'm probably going to do is, a program like WGU or something to get, a bachelor's in, probably networking or cybersecurity or cloud or something. And also reach out and see if, hopefully once this whole situation gets better, see if I can get some internships or even job opportunities while I work on the degree. And, once I do finish the IE, I'll probably be focusing a lot more in cloud and data center. So maybe I do have an Azure cert, but also maybe getting some certs in, studying up for Google Cloud or AWS, and, maybe getting a few more CCNPs, or maybe even expanding to doing security with, either Cisco or Palo Alto certifications, or, just kind of broadening out. That's the main thing I'm going to do in terms of certification.
Okay. What about so you mentioned you wanted to look at potentially internships and stuff after graduation. Um, any thought as to what kind of roles you'd be interested after internships and 5 years down the road?
hmm So, hopefully, maybe if I do continue doing this, 5 years down the line, a lot can change.
Of
Uh,
course.
maybe hopefully by then a network architect of some type, or uh, getting close to the senior network engineer type position. Focusing on various technologies. Main thing that interests me right now, as I mentioned, is cloud and data center. So maybe a data center, or I don't know, maybe working for AWS or GCP, or maybe seeing if I can get into one of those corporations, um, just to expand on what I like learning and
Yeah,
so on.
that's all definitely a possibility for you. I Any of these companies would be very lucky to have you. I'll tell you that. Um, and so, in terms of you mentioned you want to look at WGU. That's Western Governors University. I know a lot of people here at Cisco have a degree from there. I've heard a lot of great things about that online university. And so, are you a believer in getting a degree and certifications, or what's your stance on that? I know a lot of times it's one or the other. I have both. What do you think?
I think for me, if possible, uh, in theory, it would just be certification. But I'm also probably looking into, I don't know, maybe getting a job working for the government or something. And I know for sure those type of jobs, you can have all the certifications in the world, but they won't care unless you have a degree, just to even
Yeah.
apply and get through the interview process from what I've gathered. So I think, if possible, both. If you had to choose one or the other, maybe certification. But if you do, like, for example, program at WGU, they do both, where you not only get the degree, but part of the classes, some of the classes are just straight up getting certifications, and you get credit for that. So if possible, do both, and maybe look at an option like WGU where you can do both certifications and get a degree at the same time for reasonable price for what some of these universities and institutions charge.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great way to kill two birds with one stone, right? The fact that they give you credit for all the certification stuff that you've already done to be able to, I think, test out of certain classes. I think that's awesome, and
hmm
I think that's probably the right way to go. For you especially. Um, I personally, like I said, I did my degree first, and pretty much, and then I got certified the last year of college. Um, I don't think I'd change anything because it's worked out pretty good. But if if I had to choose one or the other, I think certifications is definitely where it's at. Um, but obviously, having a degree definitely helps with some of making sure that all of your doors are open and give you as many options as possible. So I think that's very wise of you to do that, especially if you're considering government, even a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of wrapping things up at this point, wanted to maybe see if there was another piece of advice, in these past, 3 years that you've been doing this and going on this journey. I'm sure you've learned a lot of things. And what would you say is like your biggest lesson learned, and what's something that you would share that maybe could be impactful to our audience?
Some of the story I mentioned, I got knocked out, network with people in real life and, networking in general. But not just that, but knowing, failing at something is acceptable. So, initially, or getting rejected. So initially, going through and applying for a boot camp, I got told no because I was too young, or same thing when trying to ask if the Cisco would change their certification policy. And as well as, I didn't mention it, I forgot to, but when I was working through my, certification journey, I failed route once, and same with troubleshoot. So knowing that is, important, that, it's fine as long as you just stand up and keep on going. Just know it's fine to fail an exam, or, maybe get rejected from a job opportunity, or, anything else. It's fine. Just keep going. And I'm sure you'll do well if, even me now, I eventually passed the route and T-shoot exam. So, just keep going, and don't let, certain obstacles get in your way. In fact, use them to, uh, motivate you, or, allow you to give yourself more discipline to, keep going, rather than seeing them as setbacks.
Yep. The Obstacle is a Way. For those of you that haven't read that book, it's a great book, by the way. One of my favorites. And yeah, that's a really great piece of advice that I think a lot of people learn at a much older age than you. So you're definitely much wiser than your age. You have wisdom above your years. I'm sure you hear that all the time. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. We are all going to encounter many different types of failures in our lives, right? But and obstacles that are going to seem to get in our way. But if we leverage those obstacles in the right way, it can become a good thing for us. It can become a lesson. It can become something that potentially makes us stronger. And I completely agree. And I mean, you've had your share of obstacles. I mean, many, because of your age, and you have not let that be an obstacle, but rather the pillar which you stand on, which I think is quite admirable, and that's awesome.
Definitely.
And honestly, Michael, I think there's no better way to end it than right there. So thank you so very much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's very honoring to be your first guest. And as I mentioned several times in the podcast, thanks to, my family and everyone else that's supported me, and everyone else in between, that's, helped me be where I am today. Because if not, I, wouldn't be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Always making sure to give credit where it's due. Our families, our friends, and literally everybody in our lives, has some form or fashion is contributing to who we are. So good on you to recognize that, Michael. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on.
All right, take care, man. Have a good weekend.
You too.